Welcome back to Introducing Virginia Mysteries. I'm Andrew Wood. This is episode number 9, final episode, Composer Notes. This episode is going to be completely different from all the other ones. All the previous 8 episodes up until this point have focused on the book, the novels that we read, interviews with experts and authors. But this episode is just going to be me talking about the music that has soundtracked this whole podcast and kind of what my role was in this whole project. But basically, at the very beginning of this project, when it was just an idea, I always wanted to contribute something musically, and we weren't completely sure yet what that was going to be. But as the reading list evolved and we got a better idea of the direction we wanted to go in, I thought it would be nice to compose a piece of music that kind of interprets all of the books that we read. But only later did it kind of become convenient that it would be the soundtrack of the podcast. So I'd done things of this nature before, composing music based on poetry or literature for various kinds of classes or assignments, but nothing on this scale, nothing quite to this degree. So it was quite challenging from the very outset, because of course I had to read all of the material, digest it, and start coming up with creative ideas and the direction I wanted to go in. And adapting art is never simple. There is no really correct way of translating one kind of art into another. There's no way for an artist to really expect their audience to completely be familiar with all of the source material that the artist was using if the artist is undergoing an adaptation, right? This is, I think, most familiar to people when books get turned into movies. And I think it's a lot harder of a task than people realize. But also, I think a mark of a good film adaptation is one where knowledge or understanding of that book that the film is adapting is not necessary in order to enjoy that film, right? I would argue it's the responsibility of the artist to convince the audience that this is true, that no knowledge is necessary. Because if the art is good, the audience is going to enjoy it regardless, right? So for this composition, my research, of course, had to begin with Poe and his time period in Virginia, in the antebellum South, and really trying to reconstruct this kind of early American folk spirit. And one piece of musical literature that I was familiar of, not from this time period, but something that could kind of help access the vibe that I was maybe trying to draw from, was Carl Sandburg's The American Songbag, which is a wonderful anthology of hundreds of American folk songs, which had only existed and proliferated the American music landscape through oral tradition. And these tunes are old, really, really old tunes, as is the main theme that I ended up choosing, O Shenandoah. So this anthology, which I love, and I love all of the very unique and quirky differences in the arrangements that all of the different composers that Sandburg brought onto the project. Each composer brings their own taste and their own style when arranging the folk songs, because in the anthology, for most of the tunes, it'll be the melody that is whichever melody that the composer or the field recorder went out and heard and recorded out, from the folk themselves. It'll be the melody, it'll be some verses and like a piano arrangement, an accompaniment underneath that most of the time. And each one is got so much personality and so much difference and tells a real story. And there are several tunes that I was looking at in this anthology that are kind of embedded in the composition that I made, just to kind of pay as much homage as I can to this, I think, wonderful piece of American musical literature. But of course, this did not really solve all of my problems. Like, Sandberg is not the source material. Like, these books, these contemporary modern books are my source material. And I have to contend with the form that I should be using, how I should even be adapting each book into music, what should my instrumentation be. I mean, I'm a pianist, but I've played several other instruments and I have experience in different ensembles. So, I mean, do I need to do something big and grandiose, or should I keep it simple? What stylistic period should I be invoking? Should it be very abstract and modern? Should it be neoclassical? Should it be very romantic and feeling? I don't know. Many, many questions. But what really helped tone it down was this idea of a main theme, especially because Libby, Febronia, and myself, we all go to Shenandoah University. And I had just come off of a semester playing a lot of choral accompaniment music to James Erb's arrangement of O Shenandoah, which is a beautiful arrangement. This was kind of, I guess, floating in my musical memory. And I thought it would be a really neat homage to the university, as well as kind of the geographic and cultural importance that the Shenandoah River has in Virginia. The tune itself, O Shenandoah, is likely as old as Poe, if not older. And there's no way, really, of knowing if it had circulated into Poe's musical landscape while he lived in Virginia, because at that time it was purely circulated through oral tradition, and there's no written record of that tune and countless others. And I should say, Poe himself was very ensconced in music all the time. I mean, his first wife was a great singer, and Poe always made sure that a piano was always available to her, despite their innumerable financial struggles throughout their time together. And both Poe's biological parents were actors and were very closely tied to the arts. So his appreciation and respect of music as an art form was nothing to sneeze at. And so I thought it would be very apt to kind of connect Poe and the time that he lived in the early 1800s with an early Virginian culture and history, where the Shenandoah, which is a tributary of the Potomac River, kind of engulfs such a important American landscape. Not only the capital, but also Appalachia and all the land in between that makes Virginia, really. And all the variety and diversity and wealth of stories that happen and have happened here. Once I decided on that, the form kind of made itself clear to me, which is a theme and variations. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with a theme and variations form in music, essentially just the composer will take a main theme. It could be O Shenandoah, it could be Happy Birthday, it could be a theme written by a completely different composer, it could be a theme written by many composers. It could really be anything. And you vary it across different variations. You can take a small idea, a big idea, doesn't really matter the idea, and you just play around with it. It's a very common kind of musical genre in classical music, and is very common for early composers, like I should say composers early in their career, of which I include myself. So the composition is really not a literal translation of the events of each book. I think I really don't want listeners to assume that. If you want to learn what the book is about and what really happens in the book, I mean, for one, you could listen to each episode because Libby and Febronia discuss that, but you could also just read the book. I mean, the books themselves are very good and have a lot to say, and I don't need to add to that. What I want the music to do is enhance and kind of be inspired by the feelings and the interpretation that the book is meant to evoke, at least in my experience. So what I attempt to do with the composition is kind of distill the feelings that I was left with after reading each book and the kind of atmosphere that the author put me in, and compose a piece of music that did justice to that feeling and that atmosphere. I felt also the need to include a lot of different musical styles, not only to demonstrate how varied culture and population America is, but also how varied these books were. And the stories that they were telling in their variety was very striking. So I have a lot of jig in there, Irish jig, because a lot of the original settlers of the Appalachian Mountains, especially in Virginia, were Ulster Scots, who were not technically Irish, but were Scots who had settled in Northern Ireland and eventually made their way over here in the Appalachian Mountains. And it's very interesting because not only is the geography of the Appalachian Mountains and the Hebrides in Scotland and Northern Ireland, like the mountainous, rugged, very lush terrain. And I was like, I wonder if those two, if these regions, if these terrains are at all related. And come to find out, they used to be part of the same mountain range back before the continents split many, many, many eons ago. So I thought that was a very cool and neat kind of coincidence that these people from a completely different continent just so happen to settle in a place with a very, very similar terrain, and which actually used to be the same land. But as my research deepened, it turned out to not only be just a coincidence. These Scots and these Irish immigrants who came over in early American history, in many ways and for many reasons, were ostracized, whether it was because of their religion or because of how they spoke. But they, because of their experience back in their homeland with difficult land that was not entirely arable all the time, they were perfectly suitable to live in the comparable place in the US. They were able to make do and innovate on that kind of land in ways that other Americans were not able to do. And for the Scotch-Irish immigrants coming over, settling in the Appalachian Mountains was another way to escape indentured servitude, which many of them were subject to coming over here. Not only that, but living in that kind of terrain took a kind of frontier mentality, very rigorous and strong, independent, individualistic mentality that Teddy Roosevelt later on actually cited as a very distinct uniquely American value, American principle. So I just thought it was very interesting that the kind of definition of what it meant to be an American, even when America was still fairly young, was not really dictated by your birthright or where you were from. It was about what you believed in and who you were and what your character was. Another interesting thing was the fact that the Scotch-Irish brought over their musical culture. Not only their musical culture, but also their literary culture. A lot of the folk ballads, folk tunes that we know today are simply American versions of the same stories that were brought over from Scotland and Ireland, just recontextualized to fit an American setting. And I found this incredibly fascinating and perfectly apt for this whole kind of medium transference that I'm kind of engaging in. And especially how this speaks to the story. It's like anything can be quote unquote American if it fits XYZ value. Anything can be quote unquote Virginian if it fits these values. I also drew on kinds of 20th century American musical idioms and styles. I don't necessarily want to say jazz or something like this, because jazz and blues is its own genre with its own set of rules. But I will say the harmonic flexibility and rhythmic intrigue that I think a lot of classical composers in the 20th century drew from jazz, it was certainly an inspiration. But the question that this whole project, and likewise my music, is trying to ask is, what is it about Virginia as a place that makes it have such a proclivity for mystery literature, mystery stories, whatever it may be. So that as a mood, I tried my best to allow that to pervade the composition as much as possible. And with special connection to Poe. And I think the general feeling that I and many people get when reading Poe is very distinct. And I suppose we're really just trying to ask, like, why that is. Why is it that we've kind of seen since the 90s a renaissance of mystery literature happening in Virginia? Very popular. A lot of the authors on our list are incredibly famous, bestsellers with tons of books out, and many of them are Virginian themselves and write mystery. Like, why is that? Why is that such happening with such prevalence? And I don't know if my composition is entirely successful, but it was, at least for me, a wonderful experience in trying to probe this question deeper and access a deeper part of these stories and really interrogate my own interpretation of them. And if that really would hold up and like do justice in a musical format. So I hope if you feel inclined to listen to the next quote unquote episode in this podcast, kind of an addendum episode, where it's just the musical performance straight through, which happened live. So there are going to be, the elements that happen with a live performance in that. There'll be some audience noises and background stuff, but it is the composition all the way through. I hope that you get something out of it by listening to it. And I hope that if you have read the books, if you're familiar with them, then it can in some way just offer an interesting perspective. I hope that if you've never read any of the books, maybe it inspires you to read one. Pick one of them up. Maybe whichever variation was your favorite. That might intrigue you the most to read its corresponding book. I don't know. I don't really have many expectations besides I am very open to any response or ideas that any audience has about this music. So there are many ways but yeah, this is where I sign off, and the whole IVM crew is signing off here on this podcast. We thank all of you for listening. If you've made it this far, please let us know what you think, how you received everything. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did you love a particular interview? Did you hate a particular interview? Could you not stand some of the music? Is it awful? Or is it fantastic and you love it? And you just you're dying to read the next book by this author. Let us know. You can support all of what we do at the English department at su.edu/arts/English. And of course, I have to thank Patricia Cornwell, Dr. Marilyn Miller, Phil and Sally James, David Baldacci, James Ellwood Jr., Swain Wood, Zaki Farowez, S.A. Cosby, Madison Pasquin, Heidi Christopher, Dr. Ann Marchant, the UVA Special Collections Library, and all their staff, Peter Armenti, the Library of Congress, Dr. Stacey Jacoy, Dr. Virginia Wheelton. Please consider supporting American literacy through Michelle and David Baldacci's Wish You Well Foundation. Incredibly inspiring stuff that they have going on over there. Please check that out. Thanks, of course, to Professor Rachael Hammond for advising this entire project. And thank you to Libby, Ellwood, and Febronia, Farowez for creating such a wonderful piece of literature. You can find their book, Introducing Virginia Mysteries, online or in print. I'm Andrew Wood, and stay mysterious.